Hi, as you can see, in San Diego. That's the skyline. It's taken from the airport, looking at downtown, which is about 1 mile separation. That's an older picture, but the skyline has a few more tall buildings, and I'll get out and take a new photo. But this one looks pretty good, though, so that was okay. This photo happened to be the basis for the front cover shot of a print glossy magazine that I um, own and owned. I published previously called San Diego Bound. It has not been published in print, but I'm launching it in the new year now online. San Diego Bound and the California Bound series will feature relocation topics, of course, from a positive point of view, as well as real estate opportunities for purchase, as well as living in. But more about me later. Very, very honored to have Joseph McGuire as our guest, live in person from Dublin. Welcome and Happy New Year. And with us from Sweden is Attica. Attica, thank you so much for your time here late in
Thank
your day. And so ChristianTerNedden is in Southern California in Orange County, which is around, what, 40, 50 miles south of downtown LA. And at ground zero, unfortunately, is Dr. KenLloyd in San Fernando Valley. He's been evacuated twice now.
Well, once we were out for a week, and then last night at midnight, we got a warning that there's a fire near us at the Sepulveda Pass. So we packed and got ready, and then they canceled the alert fortunately, they were able to contain the fire. So yeah,
Yeah,
so Joseph,
strange.
if you wouldn't mind, would you please reroute that storm to Southern California? We could use it.
Get some Irish rain while you're at it.
Yeah, really,
No
really.
shortage.
We need green grass. That's
Yeah,
what we need.
yeah, we do.
Okay, so I'm in San Diego, and north of here, about 20 miles, there's been some brush fires. But the California fire, is super ready, and they douse the flames almost immediately. So far, so good. Their forecast here for San Diego area, anyway, is increasing humidity starting not today, though, but tomorrow and Saturday, and rain forecast for Sunday into Monday here. So hopefully it will spread and not cause mudslides. But first things first, we have to douse the flames. Ken, is there any indication of how these fires spring up out of nowhere? Certainly all the grounds are parched, but Bel Air is a pretty fancy area, and it's really strange that that would happen.
Yeah, I had read, I don't really have it verified, but read that they did arrest an individual for this fire last night in the Sepulveda Pass.
Yeah.
So again, arson most likely. And these other ones, I would be concerned that that's the case as well. It's just too easy. And then there are people who are simply careless that engage in reckless behaviors that can cause these kinds of fires. But they did arrest someone last night, and I think there hopefully there will be more as well. It's just outrageous, the loss. I mean, everybody I know here knows people who've lost their homes. 15 homes from our grandchildren's school families lost their homes, and we have personal friends who did. We have children of friends who've lost their homes, and it's tragic. It's so disruptive, particularly for the children. Here they've gone through COVID and all this online learning and all, and their home, their base, the foundation is ripped away from them. It's just been just a horrible period out here. Hopefully we can turn the corner on this, but the causes could be anything. Could be electrical. It could be just the kindling is so dry. We've had no rain this year to speak of, and it's all fuel out there, and it's highly combustible. So I don't think it takes much to cause these kinds of fires.
Yeah, we had rain here in San Diego in May, which was very unusual to get rain in May, but that's the last rain. And things were beautiful. The flowers were out on the road and green grass where it's now absolutely brown, parched, just to give you an idea. So pray for rain, not too much though, just enough. So we had a talk show the other day dealing with psychological safety in the workplaces. Heather from London joined us, and a good friend from Europe, Constantine, who's a psychologist and a very successful business guy, helping companies such as Exxon and others as his longtime clients take care of mental health issues at work. But now we have a mental health issue in the population of the burnouts and homeless. It's like a death in the family and a lot of death. And so people are returning to ashes, embers, and they can't find family pictures. They can't find favorite drinking glasses, just bedspreads that they cuddle into every night. Just awful. That program has got an all-time high visibility viewership in just a week, and we'll continue that topic. Today's, we're going to focus in on psychological issues connected with trusting people who are in your orbit. JosephMcGuire is an expert, a recognized expert in facial recognition. Joseph, welcome again. I'd like to turn this program over to you. We will certainly pick up in a panel dialogue, but please take over.
Thank you, Ed. And yeah, it's always an honor to be here and to meet with such distinguished friends. Just before I launch into talking about any of my stuff, I do have regular conversations with friends in the LA area in particular. So I'm acutely conscious of a lot of what's going on and the destruction that's happened with people's homes, people's lives. So it's certainly very much on my mind in terms of obviously empathizing from afar. We don't have anything like that here. We're probably never likely to have anything like that in Ireland because we have so much rain. And I would dearly love to be able to send a lot more of it your way at the moment to just help settle everything down, but certainly in my prayers.
No, thank you very much. You know, you'd think we're right next to the Pacific Ocean, that they haven't figured out. I mean, it's almost tragic that, not almost, is tragic that they've had this water resource right there for years and years and years and have never called it a national emergency to use it as a resource. We don't have to pipe water in from New Orleans or Dublin or Alaska or wherever. It's right here. So, Joseph, facial facts. When you look at me, you see a nice hairline, and I combed my hair, washed the face today. Uh, but I'm not the target, but I could be if people were concerned about doing business with me. And so the product or the service or the thinking that you provide is from almost 40 years. I've read your bio, almost 40 years of professional work, uh, not only in law enforcement, but in media and communications, trusting the people that you're with. Why don't you just use me if you want as an example, and bring it home?
Okay, always a pleasure to see your saintly visage there, Ed. Um, yes, my background, I know Christian and Ken have met me before. I know Attica hasn't, so I'll just give you a little refresher, if I may. My background is primarily with the ancient Chinese tradition of Miansheng, and I know I'm probably mispronouncing that. If my partner were here, my partner is Chinese, she would look rather askance at me, but it's approximately right. And that tradition is a 3,000-year-old tradition where the documentation goes back that far of literally what's revealed in our static facial features. The understanding is that our static facial features reveal a huge amount of information about character, personality, behavior style, how we communicate, both in terms of how we process and receive information, but also how we communicate externally. Stress triggers and responses, health issues, because I learned it initially as a diagnostic tool, one of the cornerstones of traditional Oriental medicine, parental and grandparental influences, because there's simply a lot of information revealed in static facial features. But I've also worked, again, over that period of time with reading body language. And particularly when we went into lockdown, I did a lot of study online with former FBI and special forces trainers in the fields of interrogation, negotiation, elicitation. So I bring together quite a range of skills, because I'm called on, my services are called on typically to help companies with negotiation. And I'm helping the owners recognize how they come across, how they're perceived, as well as profiling the people they're going to be meeting and engaging with in negotiation. I'm also called on to help with executive interviews and to read the real person behind the elegant image and the wonderful CV and all of that people like to present with, because people can train, obviously, for interviews. But I'm paying attention to not just the visuals, not just in terms of the face, the facial features, facial expressions, and the body language. I'm also paying attention to what they say and how they say it and what they don't say. And I will often use in an interview or a negotiation, I will often use silence strategically, because silence in communication is a very, very powerful tool. Silence conveys a huge amount of information, but it can also be very soothing for some people. It can be very unsettling for others. And when we learn to be comfortable with silence, and many people aren't, I did read a study some time ago that the average person in Europe, particularly continental Europe, can maintain a silence for something like 8 seconds before they feel compelled to speak or break it in some way, whether it's sound of a word or movement. But when we learn to be comfortable with silence, particularly in a business context, it can be very, very powerful indeed. It can obviously be used to intimidate, and hands up, I have used it in that context as well, to draw information out of people. I can put a scowl on as well as anybody. So a silent scowl can be equally very effective tool, but it's all part of the toolkit. But ultimately, what I'm really about is helping people communicate and helping people bring out the best of themselves, particularly, again, even in a business context. And I know that's not always what people start out wanting. But one thing I have learned over the years, and I suspect Ken and Christian and probably yourself, Ed, would certainly have be aligned with it, is that the stronger our relationships and the more we can actually build relationship, create relationship with clear communication, with empathy, the more we're likely to actually not just deal successfully with the people in front of us, but we're likely to expand the circle through their connections for us, but also our connections for them. So it really is about clarity of communication, empathetic, confident, open communication, but not looking to force anything, to encourage, to support, but not force. I have a question. How many of you see with your eyes?
Rhetorical.
Well, it's a trick question, because you do and you don't. The lens is part of the eye, but in effect, the eye is a lens. And by the time an image transfers or transmits through the eye to the visual cortex back here, it's upside down, it's two-dimensional, and there's approximately a third of the image missing. And the mind fills in that gap based on what it expects to see. So by and large, we are seeing what we expect to see rather than necessarily what is there. Are you familiar with the invisible gorilla?
No.
Okay, it's worth checking it out on YouTube. It was an experiment done by two psychologists, Chabris and Simons, back in originally 1999. And what they did was they set up a basketball game, and they had two control groups. One group was to count the number of times the team in white tops passed the ball. The other control group was to count the number of times the team in black tops passed the ball. And in the middle of the game, a guy dressed in a gorilla suit walked across the middle of the court, beat his chest several times, and walked off again. 46% of the total control group had no awareness that anybody in a gorilla suit had been near the court, and that study has been replicated multiple times. In fact, I told a friend of mine about it some years ago, and when her husband came home from work, she put it on the screen in front of him, and it happens that he's an accountant, so he's very much used to counting figures, counting numbers, and he didn't see the person in the gorilla suit, and he was quite annoyed at the end that he'd missed it. But why I'm mentioning it is because I'm not sure if it was Chabris and Simons or if it came prior to them, but the term was coined inattentional blindness. So again, so often we don't see what's actually in front of us because our attention is absorbed based on what we expect to see, based on all the stuff that's going around in our heads, and increasingly our minds are busy, busy, busy. We're living in a world of busyness, increasing busyness. So my role is to pay attention. That's it in simple terms. I do have a couple of slides prepared. If I can just take you through a few, if that's
Sure, absolutely. My screen
okay.
share is available.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not going to show very much. I just wanted to show a couple of things. Okay. When we see a face, we actually register faces in something like 1/17 of a second. So before we have time to think about it. And when we see a face, we tell ourselves, we create a story about the person, which may or may not have anything to do with their reality. In fact, it's often to do with our biases, whether those biases are positive or negative. But we tell ourselves a story. It could be that somebody actually looks really attractive to us, or somebody repels us. It could be that they look like somebody we get on very well with, or we had a particular falling out with. But we create a story. So again, it comes back to the idea of paying attention and checking, not making any kind of assumption when we meet somebody.
It's difficult, though.
It takes practice, 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 and more practice, Ed. That's the reality. I think it was Gary Player, the former champion golfer, who said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. And it just to perfect any skill, and perfect is probably the wrong word, to master any skill, it takes practice, 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 repetition, repetition, repetition. I know the story was there of Kobe Bryant, the former basketball player. When he was in the early days of his career, he would practice 3 times a day. It wasn't that he was particularly good initially, relatively speaking, but he would practice 3 times a day. Everybody else was gone home. Kobe was practicing. And then others realized, this guy is getting good. This guy is really improving. This guy is becoming somebody. They started to practice 3 times a day, but he continued to practice 3 times a day. So they weren't quite catching. Christian.
So how do you practice that, Joseph? I mean, I understand that it's really hard without practice, but how do you even go about practicing that?
How I learned it was starting with one aspect of the face and focusing on one area of the face for particular periods of time, and realizing there were all sorts of variations. For example, I might start with I might have started with eyebrows, and I gradually learned that there were I could identify something like 26 different variations in eyebrow size, shape, angle. And then I would go to my teachers. I would go to the literature and start figuring out, okay, what does this size, shape, and angle mean? And then I would start to add maybe the eyes or aspect to the forehead. So it's been building up detail upon detail upon detail, layer upon layer upon layer. But it starts for me with not assuming anything. Really, if we're starting from scratch, it starts with not assuming anything. And then we ask what are our eyes telling us? A couple of exercises you can practice to get you into the whole thing of people reading and not just face reading. If you get a good facial shot, frontal facial shot of any given celebrity, top business person, whoever it might be, and just cover one side of the face and ask yourself, what's the message? What's the feeling you're getting from the visible side? And then switch sides. Ask yourself, are you getting the same message? Very often you won't. So start with your intuition. Start with your intuition. From the Chinese perspective that I've been working with over the last 40 years, the understanding is that the right side of the person's face reveals the public persona, the left side reveals the private persona. So you'll very often find with people in the public eye, no pun intended, that when you look at one side of the face and then look at the other, they can appear, particularly with the right side, they can appear to be outgoing, happy, content. But then you look at the left side, the private side, and particularly look at the left eye, you'll often find there's a very different message from the left eye, from the private persona. So starting point, that's one exercise to start off. And one other one is, if you see a politician being interviewed on TV and they're apparently being emotive or very expressive, watch the interview and then rewind and watch it with the sound off and ask it, is what you're seeing congruent with what you heard? It's ingrained in us to read body language, to read nonverbal communication. We've been doing it for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. It's partly how our ancestors survived, because we had to when people originally lived in small groups, they had to recognize if a stranger were approaching, whether they were friend or foe. They had to know very, very quickly, because quite often it would have been a matter of life or death. So we have all this, but we've been conditioned out of it. That may be a long and rambling answer to your question, Christian, but I hope it's helpful.
This helps. So what I think I heard you say also is, when you practice, you're deconstructing the face so that you can't really read it anymore, because all you're reading is eyebrows. And then all you're reading is eyes. And that way you never get, your biases never come into play, because you're only seeing a small sliver of the whole face at one time.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I love this because it's such a powerful image for me. The Chinese character for listening includes not just the ears, but the eyes. And it includes the heart. I'll come to the heart again in a moment. King here means mind. And when it says one or single, it's all of those capacities working together. Now, have any of you come across the Heart Math Institute? It's worth checking out. But their research has shown that we actually have a brain in the heart and we have a brain in the gut. And there are actually more signals, they've measured it, that there are more signals go up from the brain in the gut and the brain in the heart to the head than vice versa. So again, this goes back to the idea of our senses and our intuition. We talk about gut feeling, but the heart has been measured to transmit a vibration somewhere between 5 and 10 feet out from the body. And equally, it receives vibration when we're meeting other people, especially in person. So when we're paying attention to what our body is telling us, not just what our eyes are telling us or what our ears are telling us, or our intellect is telling us, what our body is telling us, we can actually process a lot of information. We can get a lot of clarity, particularly when we practice paying attention to the body. But we can get a lot of clarity about what's really going on for the people we meet. And then we start to check. Then we can investigate. But pay attention. I recommend paying attention to the sensations, the feelings we get first, and then start to check for the evidence.
So if I may ask what
Absolutely.
maybe a silly question, but so just tell me if it
No
is,
silly questions, Ed.
or
Oh, that's a good one.
redirect me. But I'm going to just ask you what comes to mind here from what you just said. So I'm brought into a room of strangers. People, they look at each other, right? And so if I get a gut feeling, that means the stomach, right? So um, uh, if my stomach like feels sick or something, or gurgles for some reason, but I won't express any more thoughts that I have about stomach noises. But is that a negative? Because it's somewhat embarrassing, or there's a reaction going on.
Well, if it's making noises, it's probably just you or me, as the case may be. But if it's a feeling of discomfort and it's not translating into like actual physical discomfort, it's more as a sensation of discomfort that's sudden. You didn't have it when you entered the room, but suddenly you have it. That's what I recommend paying attention to.
Yeah, okay.
You find
So
yourself in the presence of a particular person or a group of people, and you suddenly feel uneasy for some unexplained reason. Pay attention. That's really all I would say there.
So on another thing, so I'm very much into media, but not everybody is comfortable with that. It's very obvious, of course. But when uh, when you see somebody on TV say, and this is not political at all, but one of President Trump's appointees, but they haven't been confirmed yet, um, and you see a face, an image, you get an immediate feeling, or nothing, you know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's it. Like I said, we've been conditioned out of paying attention to our senses. And there's three basic possibilities when you meet somebody. There's three basic possibilities. You'll feel warmed, you'll feel a degree of openness, you'll feel neutral, nothing in particular. Could be good, could be bad, or you'll feel cold. You'll feel no, don't want to engage with this person for whatever reason. So again, it comes back to not making yourself pay attention. You got the feeling, okay, let's see what happens next. And one of the things I've learned to do, and particularly in a business context, much more than a social context, because they are different, but particularly in a business context, I've learned to not speak or speak very little and encourage others to speak. Let people reveal themselves. And that may sound terribly clinical, but it's actually a very good way to connect. Because one of our primary needs as human beings is to feel heard. And when somebody feels heard, they're more likely to open up because there's not enough listening in the world. And it goes back to the partly what Ken was saying about, children being removed from social contact, the school system when we were locked down. They weren't getting the normal nurturing that they would expect to get. Then if their homes are destroyed, that's obviously devastating. And there is it's recognized at this point pretty widely that there is an epidemic of loneliness out there. So when people actually feel heard, when you genuinely listen to them, even if it's a one-off conversation, when people feel heard, it actually soothes them. It actually helps them relax within themselves. even, like I say, even if the conversation goes no further than a one-off conversation.
Ken?
This is all just absolutely brilliant information, and certainly enjoy hearing it. Totally agree with Joseph's points. I remember reading an article about one of the legendary debates in politics was Nixon versus Kennedy. And if you saw that on TV, John Kennedy clobbered him. John Kennedy looked presidential. He looked crisp and sharp. Nixon had on a suit that blended with the background. The interesting thing is that people who heard the debate on the radio thought Nixon won. And that was, again, just seeing it, our expectations, what's going on visually. And yet, you know, I like the idea of going the other way as well as what Joseph said. Listen to what someone said and turn it off. Turn off the sound and just look at what they're saying in terms of the way that they're saying it. It's so fascinating. We know our perceptions are distorted by so many factors that Joseph mentioned. Prior experiences. If you meet someone who looks like that sixth grade teacher that you couldn't stand, you're not going to get a positive reaction. And that's happened to me personally, by the way. Yeah. But separate story. But
No.
you know, at the same time, the positive bias can come as well. And then the scary thing is that there are plenty of, if you will, sociopaths out there who look really good, well dressed, well coiffed, nice smile, everything. And some of them turn out to be the worst sorts of predators that one can imagine. But we're getting cues from them because they're very good at this. I like what Joseph said about looking at both sides of the face. That is so interesting, and that's something to really keep in mind. But to recognize also what our needs are doing to us. If I'm hungry, for example, food is going to impact what I see and what I say. You know, suddenly a plant's going to look like a hamburger, and you'll hear food words coming in. I'm hungry to learn more. I've got a real appetite for this topic. All that comes in and affects our behaviors and our perception. So what Joseph is providing, I just say thank you. It's absolutely fascinating information.
So I'm looking at the word king, and forgive me, but I have forgotten what you said. What does king connote?
Mind.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I love listening to you. You're always very eloquent, and I'd love to have that degree of eloquence. And I think you know me well enough at this point. I don't say nice things for the sake of it. So absolutely genuinely meant. Just two things I might pick up on from what Ken said there. I'll start with the final one, the hunger bit. I don't know if you can see it clearly on me, but I have a deep vertical crease here, the lower forehead area. But if you see that on somebody, that the deeper the crease, the more significant it is. It tells you that there's a deep-seated tendency towards hypoglycemia or low blood sugar levels. So when somebody has that, they should eat small amounts of food regularly and not simple sugars like, you know, cookies, chocolate, cakes, etc. More substantial foods than that. But it inclines people towards being hypercritical of themselves as much as of others. And they can also have a tendency towards perfectionism. But in terms of the blood sugar dimension, if they're not maintaining and managing their blood sugar levels in a stable way, their judgment can be seriously impaired, and they can be either impulsive or their mind can fog, and they can find it very difficult to make decisions. And interestingly, there's a phenomenon in the legal world where if you're unfortunate enough to be up for sentencing before a judge, you're better off if it's a morning session when the judge has breakfasted rather than later in the day when their blood sugar level goes down, because you're likely to get a lighter sentence in the morning than later in the day. Just going back to the Kennedy-Nixon debate, that was the first televised presidential debate. And Kennedy was the young pretender. Nixon was the outgoing vice president. Kennedy arrived in the studio early. He chatted with all the crew He made sure he was familiar with them, talked about the television, TV angles, etc., camera angles, but he also wore the makeup that was advised. Nixon arrived late. He was ill at the time. He refused to wear makeup because he said it was unmanly. And when he was seen on screen, he looked like he had the 5 o'clock shadow, and that's where, and people didn't trust him as a. He was also sweating slightly, so he looked uncomfortable, and that's where the nickname Tricky Dicky originated. But as Ken so rightly said, people who just heard the debate on the radio thought Nixon won by a mile, but the TV vote was decisive.
So Attica, what do you think of all this?
It's very interesting, and that's why I really jumped and joined the conversation when you sent me the invite. So thank you, Joseph. It's amazing what you have talked about, and I'm really so interested to whatever you have talked about to read more about it. But I am very closely associated with nonverbal communication because I have my youngest one is nonverbal autistic. And so since the 11 years of his life up till now, we have been training to not think of communication as language, like a spoken communication in other ways. So I would like to, so with the first trainings that we had for him was with the hospital here, and they started the training. It was a 5-day session, and they started and they asked us our expectations. So as young, parents who were just diagnosed with, who got the diagnosis for nonverbal autism. So we thought that, okay, this training, it will help us make our child speak. And that was our expectation at the first, when they asked us. And at the end of the session, of the 5th session, we were like, no, spoken word is not communication. Face and how the expression is, and like Joseph said, and like Ken pointed out, there's so many things that affect how the face is, and how at what point of time you're reading that face to understand a person. So and that nonverbal communication and how what the face says comes in very handy to me when I'm in conversation with the business and with the employee. Because a lot of times, Joseph, taking again your point about people wanting to be heard, because a lot of times people are like shouting, they start the conversation from like, oh, this is not done, blah, blah, blah. And then you give them time. They talk, and then things change, and then they reach a mellow stage, and then they reach a point where they want to discuss. A two-way communication happens. So a lot of my colleagues sometimes get also like we get the thing that, oh, this person is so rude and he looks so angry all the time. But again, the thing that, okay, it's a persona, or maybe and we are not experts like you, Joseph, things. But with working with people, teachers also, like Christian, you ask, how do you practice? But that is our practice, day in and day out. We are with people and observing them, and noticing the behavior changes, or our perception changing. Not face reading, but the whole persona, so to say. So yeah, it's a very interesting topic. I mean, for me personally, also face reading and all these topics are personally very, very interesting to me. Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attica. Yeah, your child, your youngest, is very fortunate. You're showing that level of love and care, and that you're really paying attention to their world. That's quite a blessing. My younger sister, she was born with Down syndrome, but she lives in full-time care. She has full-blown Alzheimer's. I was talking to her carers last week, and asking how they know what she wants at any given time. So they've learned to pay attention to the sounds, the differences in the sound, and the difference in slight body movement or facial expression. So like they don't have a formal training in it, but they've learned to be very perceptive in terms of
Yeah.
all of that. And like you say, so much of what's communicated is not verbal. And the fact that we speak doesn't mean we're communicating.
Mhm. Yes, exactly. Because words are the most deceptive things. It's the face or what is, yeah, the non-communication is the best way. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure how we're doing for time, Ed, or whether any more slides are appropriate or just open the floor to everybody else, because it's
You
not
We
have
have,
about me.
you have all the time you need. We're about halfway through on the clock, but there's no deadline. People, if you need to leave, just leave. And this is just wonderful and so meaningful. So Christian, you are preparing to do some new things with your life, your work life, and it's going to impact your time with family, I would guess.
Yes, it will. It will. That's something that I'm kind of mentally trying to prepare for, that it will be different than it's been for the last 5 years. Um, and one of the ways I do that is to just really think about life being in phases. And yeah, it's a new phase, and that happens, and that's something that you should welcome, because if your life is always the same, you stay in the same phase all the time, you can't really grow. And then I compare it to some of the more extreme changes that I've had in my life. Like, for instance, when I moved to the United States, I really left Switzerland behind in a lot of ways. And it's, it's changed, but I'm trying to be as intentional and mindful about it as I can.
So how are you communicating that with your family? If I may
I
ask, I hope I'm
No,
not
no,
intruding.
that's a very, very good question. It's really kind of, I talk about it first of all, and I just say things like, this and this thing is going to be different, or the routine is going to be different in this and this way, I expect. And I'm trying to make them start really thinking about it, because the reason why I do this is I want to mitigate the impact that it's going to have on them somewhat. And it's just weird with COVID, it's almost like COVID seems a long time ago, but I'm still in a way living in the stay at home phase. It hasn't really changed that much from when you couldn't leave. I'm not going out of the house that much either these days. So those would be the changes. And I'm also, as I'm saying all this, I'm also sure I'm probably not the only one going through this. Some people may have experienced it, 2 years ago, but we were all very locked down, and then started opening up again, and seeing friends, and some of us probably went out more than other people.
Dr. Ken, you must have a lot of insight into all of this.
Well, I think we were fortunate on this program to meet Christian's daughter, Natalie.
Yes.
And among other things, setting aside her brilliant comments and her poise and her
Yes.
grace and her elegance in communicating, you could see her deep love for her dad.
Oh, thank
And
you.
I think that your children must be so happy for you and
They are.
proud of you. And they'll still have lots of quality time with them. They'll want to hear about what you're doing. And you're also giving them the freedom in their lives to pursue their own interests. So I think it will work out very well because of the very strong relationship that you've built to date with them. So I would see all green lights, all positive for you going forward on this, Christian.
Thank you,
I
Ken.
know
That
that
means
will
a
be
lot.
the outcome. Yeah,
Appreciate
So
it.
I'm holding up the book because you might need to look at this again.
Yes, I thought of that too. I've started to read it, and then I thought, okay, there's other stuff going on. And I thought, wait a minute, I will need this. I'll take it to the office, and yeah, you know, and of course I can brag. I know this guy.
That is so nice of you. Thank
Of
you.
course.
Thank you.
Oh boy. So 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 Attica, I'm stumbling here for some reason. So Attica, wind energy, that's what you're doing, right? For the most part. And so there's a lot of technical, a lot of science connected with that. Are these people are working, well, there is no office, right? They're out in the field or what?
Ye- So, so we provide support to Hitachi Energy provides has obviously a lot of work in the oil and gas industry. So we provide services, we provide products, we have engineers working there, and those engineers they work offshore, but that's not all that Hitachi Energy does. So we are not just into renewable energy, but we have onshore platforms as well. But what you're talking about is offshore platform, yes. So that, uh, yeah, so they live on the platform, those
Yeah.
people. But
So
but they go like 2 weeks and then they are back 2 weeks. So they do work on rotation when they are on platforms.
So, Joseph, I welcome you to show additional slides. Um, when you have people who are working, like highly skilled technical people, like Attica was just describing, everybody's different, of course, but uh, in your experience, are people with those kinds of skills, skills that Attica just described, are they doing the same things that you're doing, but maybe not as conscious about it? I'm stumbling around with words for the first time in my life, I think here, but uh, I'm just trying to apply new knowledge from you into different situations. With Christian heading back into an office environment and leaving communications apparently beautiful, outgoing, deep level communications within his family structure, not to mention on this TV screen. But now going into an old environment, well, now new, very new. But so, Christian, you're bringing all these new skills
Mhm.
into the environment. I predict a smashing success for you
Thank
personally,
you.
because you're going to bring insight that I would think a lot of people have not thought about.
Yeah, and this right now being a case in point, I took a lot of notes from what Joseph said, and I'm going to definitely start looking at eyebrows and so on. I want to, you know, start being more mindful of other people and what they say, and also hope not to talk as much as I typically do. That would be a good idea as well. So yes, absolutely, you're right on point, Ed.
Yeah, right. Joseph, what's next? What slide do you want to show?
Hey, well, since we have live faces on screen, I might just refer to a couple of things. Um, Christian just mentioned eyebrows, and when we look at the eyebrow, it's it's a quick and when we were in COVID and lockdown, people were wearing masks, so
Mhm.
really all you could see were the eyes and the eyebrows, but it still provided a lot of information for me. So again, there are a couple of very simple variations on the eyebrow that you can recognize, and it tells you a lot about how people like to receive information. Like, for example, the main body of Christian's eyebrows are relatively straight.
Mhm.
So Christian likes information presented in a clearly structured, factual manner.
Yep.
Whereas if I talk with Christian and I'm very abstract, I will lose his attention very, very quickly.
You'll get a frown.
Yeah,
You'll
yeah,
get a frown from
absolutely.
me.
So it's meeting people where they're at. We've probably all heard about the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated,
Mhm.
but it has been superseded by the platinum rule, treat others as they would like to be treated. So it's meeting people where they're at. It's recognizing how others best receive information, best like to be treated, best like to be recognized. So So that's one very simple thing to observe, is whether the eyebrows are essentially straight. And that tells you that people like information presented in a clear, factual, structured way. And if they're thicker, like Christians are, they like a lot of information. If Christian senses that you're holding back on something, he'll have a few doubts. So the other two basic variations are, one is where the eyebrow is essentially curved, and these are more feeling based. So you'd be using words like, how do you feel about this? Even in a business context, even if it's a major deal, big negotiation, how do you feel about this? Even the environment in which they meet will be important to them. The ambience of the environment will be important. Tonality will be important. Where if I were in a business meeting with Christian, based simply on the essentially horizontal eyebrows, I don't have to vary my tone of voice too much. But if I were meeting somebody with more curved eyebrows, like Atika's eyebrows are more curved, then variation in tonality, variation in rhythm is important. Because if I were just speaking in a monotone all the time, she would lose interest in the conversation very quickly. But I don't have to have that huge variation in tonality with Christian. And I don't mean that in any offensive way, Christian, because
No, you're dead on.
Going back to something Ken was saying, and I'm just observing your face here, you are naturally very empathetic.
Mhm.
That's a statement of fact. And that's one of the great strengths you would bring to your family, is you radiate empathy. So that's one of the great strengths you would bring, and in a business context as well. You have a capacity to make people feel at ease.
So this brought up a question. You mentioned the Nixon debate and the makeup, and now you're bringing up eyebrows. So what happens when you're talking to somebody who made changes to their face? For instance, eyebrows can be plucked, they can be curved, they can be shaped. You know, I could have, I mean, not me personally, because they would look horrible, but I could have a beard that would cover most of my mouth, right? What do you do when there's clearly either information that is not there, or information that, to you, because you're reading it as information, that is changed? How do you decipher that?
Sure. Yeah, great question, actually. Thank you. Obviously, many women sculpt their eyebrows. Some men do now, but many women do. So I'm looking, I can usually identify what would be the natural shape, size, length, etc. And then I will look at what they have done, what they've altered, how it's been altered. And the alteration is, I would describe it as an aspiration. How they aspire to be perceived, how they aspire to be recognized. That's the first thing. The second thing then is if somebody has cosmetic surgery or Botox, and I've worked with quite a number of cases like that, I will pay attention to where the changes have been made, because where the changes have been made will be very revealing to me, because different areas of the face relate to different aspects of personality. So, and also, not to get into too much, not to make it too complex, but the face is also regarded as a life map. So the first 14 years of life are on the ears, and then we have the 20s, 30s, etc. So where an alteration appears on the face will be revealing to me in terms of a time of life as well as aspect of the personality. So that's part of the answer. Then in terms of somebody having a beard, like I did a brief facial profile of Alex Hormozy there. I posted it on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, and he's got a pretty sizable beard and mustache. So thanks, Atika.
It was really great. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So I look at what is visible. But if somebody can grow like a full beard like that, it tells me that there's a lot of vitality there. Because if somebody can't grow a beard, I could grow a beard, but it wouldn't be great. But if somebody has a full beard like that, it tells me there's a lot of vitality there. I could go off on other tangents on that one, but I'll refrain. Does that help answer the question?
It's immediate feeling. It's kind of, or thought, it's kind of hard not to read that as a negative in a way, right? If I can't grow a beard, I just can't. There's not enough growth. So does that mean I'm not vital enough? How do you, particularly when you look at executives and so on, where you have to evaluate them?
Yeah.
How do you deal with things that may be perceived as negative, particularly by the people reading your report?
Yeah, well, I have to present the report in such a way that I'm not using negative language, or as I will tend to raise questions. I will tend to phrase things as questions, and it has to be in the context of what my client is looking for. What are their priorities? And again, taking my views out of it. So it's not about opinion. It's about observation. Like one of the slides I have there, and I won't bring it up now, but one of the slides I have there is a quote from Carl Sagan, who had been one of my heroes. I don't want to believe, I want to know. Because I'm not interested in what people believe. I'm more interested in what they know. So as far as possible, it's factual, it's observational, and it's providing questions. It's not telling. I'm not telling clients that in the context, for example, of an executive appointment, I'm not telling them they should or shouldn't appoint somebody. I'm saying if you appoint them, these are their likely behavior patterns. This is how they're likely to interact with team members. This is how they're likely to communicate. This is how they're likely to respond under stress. And these are key questions I would be asking to probe further before making any decision. In terms of the beard, there are cultures. There are many cultures where it's simply not part of. It's just not part of the culture to grow a beard. It happened like Alex Hormozi is originally his heritage is on his father's side is Iranian, and it's very normal to have heavy hair growth there. But in many cultures, it's not. For example, the tradition I learned from originally, the Chinese tradition, it's not normal for people to grow a lot of beard. Certainly wasn't back then. But there are many traditions where there isn't a lot of facial hair. It's just, and it's like it's been people have evolved out of it or never evolved into it, as it were, in the first place. So it's not. I certainly don't mean it as a lack of virility if we can't grow a beard in that sense. It's more some traditions have a lot of it.
Okay, that answered that question. And also, you're really reading faces like data. I think that's something that just really clicked. That's why you take the bias out of it, because it's data. You're looking at it in a very scientific way.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an education. Thank you. Come back again. Do more.
Always a pleasure. Always delighted to be invited, and I'm always happy to listen, because you invariably have such fascinating people on here, Ed, and like Christian and Ken and I have obviously met on numerous occasions, and it's always such a pleasure to listen, because I always learn so much. And it goes back to I think you brought it up actually initially, Ed. Expertise is expertise, whatever somebody's background is. And when I listen to somebody speaking from their position as an expert, I learn so much, because they're how they present, how they communicate, how they share their knowledge. is a wonderful learning experience for me. And it's a wonderful opportunity simply to listen and be informed.
I'm thankful to have this recording because people worldwide will see this.
I make one quick observation. This was so fascinating and compelling that, Joseph, if you had a gorilla run by on the screen, I would have missed it. I simply wouldn't have seen it. It's so
Nice.
focused on what you're saying. So
Nice.
thank you. It's just excellent.
Thank you.
That's a good way to end this. Boy, I can't top that. Be safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Thanks,
Thank
Joseph.
you.
Thanks,
Well, all.
thanks, Ken.
Take care. Thank
Okay.
you.
So I'll be working on editing, and you'll get a copy of this later in my day today.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
great.
Thanks,
Thank
one
you.
and all.
Bye.
Be well.
Thank you. Bye. Be
Bye-bye.
safe.